Hey guys, today in the shop we're going to be installing a set of Mevotech TTX ball joints on the shop truck. And I'm going to show you a few tricks to make the job go smoother and also to make sure you get a proper installation to ensure the longest life out of your ball joints. The ball joints we're going to be installing today are the Mevotech TTX line. And these things are pretty sweet little units. They come with all the hardware you need for the installation. They come with the snap rings, the Zerk fitting, and they even have a little cap for the Zerk fitting, which that's really one of the only brands I've ever seen that comes with that. It's pretty nice. Along with that, all of the metal components are coated with corrosion resistant, which is great, especially, we live in New England. As you can see, this truck already has its fair share of corrosion, so whatever we can do to stop that from continuing on is a pretty good thing. They also have an integrated boot, which is nice because some of these ball joints, what happens is the boot is supposed to clip over the edge of the lip right here, and they don't. They don't stay clipped on, they don't stay in place, so moisture and dirt can get up inside there, and then, of course, that causes a premature failure of the ball joint. All right, so let's get right into the teardown. After making sure the truck is properly secured on jack stands, you can remove the wheel. Then the first thing I like to do is pop the tie rod off. Start by taking off the cotter pin, then the retaining clip, remove the tie rod nut, then you can strike the side of the knuckle where the tie rod goes through, and the tie rod will pop out. Next, we'll move on to the brakes. You can swing it around so you can get an impact or a ratchet on the back side of the caliper. If you can, I like to take the entire caliper bracket off unless you're doing brakes at this time. Make sure you hang it up so it's not hanging by the brake hose. Then you can unplug the ABS sensor. You don't have to remove the rotor to do this job, but the rotor and knuckle assembly are pretty heavy. I'm removing the rotor anyway because I want to clean up and paint the knuckle. After the rotor is removed, you can take the top cross bolt out for the upper ball joint. Then we can move on to the lower. Remove the cotter pin for the lower ball joint. Then back the nut off. I like to leave the nut threaded on a little bit. You can either use a pickle fork or give the I-beam a whack the same way you did with the tie rod, and it should drop down. But once it drops down, you can remove the nut the rest of the way and then remove the spindle from the truck. All right, now that the spindle's on the bench, what we can do is remove the snap ring on the lower ball joint and then take out any grease fittings that are already there. The factory ball joints don't have grease fittings, but obviously at some point these have been changed. So get those grease fittings out of the way, get the snap ring out of the way, and then we'll move on to pressing the ball joints out. All right, now that you have that snap ring and the grease fittings out of the way, next step is to press the ball joints out. Now, you can get a ball joint press at some of your local auto parts stores, will rent them out, but you definitely want to make sure you have a good press. And another thing I will say when you are doing this stuff is make sure you wear safety glasses, especially when dealing with any kind of power tools, presses, or anything with rust, because if you've never had anything in your eyes, you don't want to experience that. You don't want to learn the hard way. I have. It's not fun. So let's get pressing on this. The biggest suggestion I can make to you is make sure you use a cup that clears the entire ball joint. Sometimes people will use a cup that's a little bit too small, And then as they start pressing, what happens is the ball joint pushes against the cup, and then it can't push it out. So you're just using all that force, and you're just pushing against itself and fighting the forces. So make sure the cup that you use fits over the ball joint completely and doesn't interfere with any of the flange. You may need to use a different size for the upper and lower. On this application you do. The upper ball joint's a little bit smaller of a diameter, so you're going to use a smaller cup, but all that should be in the ball joint press kit. Start by pressing out the lower ball joint first. Then feed the threads of the press through the lower ball joint hole and press out the upper. So an important step a lot of people miss when they do ball joints is they don't clean out the bores where the ball joints ride. So you really want to take care to make sure all of the corrosion and any buildup that's inside the socket where the ball joint fits is nice and clean. This will make sure the ball joint fits properly. Believe it or not, the small amount of corrosion can actually change the way the ball joint fits in this. So make sure you take care of that. Same thing goes on the axle itself where the ball joint goes through the taper. Make sure you clean all the rust out of that. Make sure it's nice and clean. You don't want to use like any kind of burring tool or anything that will change or distort the shape, but a nice wire brush, make sure all the rust is gone, and it'll be good to go. I'm going to take this spindle, I'm going to throw it in the sandblaster real quick, and then I'm going to give it a quick coat of paint, and then we'll get the new ball joints pressed in. All right, now that your knuckle's all cleaned up, what you can do is start reassembling. So you want to reverse the procedure that you used to take it apart. So you want to do the upper ball joint first, and then install the lower ball joint. Now, you're going to need a bigger cup on the bottom side. That way, as the ball joint pushes through, it doesn't, on the upper it doesn't pass through, but you still need to clamp onto here. But on the lower, it's going to pass through. So you can't just use the flange that comes with the ball joint press. You really need a cup on the bottom. That way, as the ball joint protrudes through, it doesn't interfere with pressing the ball joint. Another great benefit of these Mevotech TTX ball joints is they come with installation rings. So sometimes you'll find some of the brands that don't come with the installation rings, it'll be a little bit difficult to find a cup that fits perfectly onto the ball joint right here. So this installation ring goes on. Now you can use your rings and your cups with your ball joint press to press right on top of here, and you don't have to worry about damaging the ball joint or finding a cup that doesn't quite fit right. This gives you a little bit more real estate to push on to make sure you get the ball joint all the way in. Just make sure once you're done pressing it in, you take this installation ring and you remove it. That way it doesn't accidentally get left on as you install it, because that will interfere with the depth that the ball joint goes and give you all sorts of other problems. Press the upper in until it seats all the way. Then the lower. Then install the snap ring on the lower ball joint. And finally, the grease fittings. Make sure you pay attention to where the lower grease fitting ends up. It is at a 90-degree angle, and you kind of want to make sure that it aims in a direction that you can get a grease gun on it. I like to point it forward towards the steering, so when I'm laying under the front of the truck greasing the rest, I can get to this one. Before we put our knuckle back in, one thing you want to address is the caster and camber bushing. So this bushing sits in here. Fortunately, mine came right out because I did just have this all apart. But this bushing is what's going to adjust your caster and your camber on the truck. So I'm going to be replacing it with a 0-degree bushing for this particular application. This is something that you're going to want to change based on the alignment you need. So if you're not going to be changing this, what you want to do is take it out, clean it up, clean the bore nice, As you can see, there was already some junk in here just from moving the truck around and everything, but this one's going to the side. I might keep it just in case I need to do anything with the alignment, but we're going to be putting brand new bushings in here. So once again, clean the bore in here. Clean the bore in here where the lower ball joint goes. Use a wire brush. Use whatever you have to. Even maybe a light file if you really need to touch up some real heavy corrosion. But aside from that, be careful not to take any metal off. Like I said earlier, you don't want to distort the shape of the bore at all. All you're doing is just trying to get rid of any corrosion or debris. All right, now we can get this knuckle installed. So have the nut in your hand or close by, because sometimes these things can get a little bit awkward after a little while, but you want to line up the lower and the upper ball joint, slide it up as high as you can, and just get the nut started. After the nut started on there, you might need to use a floor jack and jack up on the knuckle and push it up until the ball joint seats. Now, you can apply a decent amount of force here. Just watch out to make sure you're not crushing the grease fitting or anything or the backing plate. But the force that you apply is going to help so the ball joint doesn't spin as you're tightening it down. After you get the nut on and snug down, you want to make sure you torque it. So the torque specs on these particular ball joints are 99 foot-pounds. It's very important to make sure you torque these things. If you don't torque them, you can have issues like memory steer or premature failure of the ball joints, or if you under-tighten them, you can have them loosen up, and obviously you can have some dangerous situations there. So make sure steering components always torqued. After you torque it, you got to put the clip on the lower ball joint. This replaces a cotter pin. It's actually a pretty nice design. It snaps into place. But one little piece of advice I'll give you is if for some reason the hole that this clip passes through doesn't line up, you can always go a little bit tighter to get it to line up. You never want to loosen it. So you can go slightly past the torque spec to get this to line up, to get the clip to go in. Fortunately, this one, if we come through this way, the hole is lined right up with one of the open spots on the nut. But like I said, always go tighter, never looser to get this to line up. And then next, install the cross bolt. And torque it to 60 foot-pounds. These Mevotech ball joints do come pre-greased, but I always like to put 1 pump of grease in each one. Don't go crazy. You don't want to be pushing grease all out of it, but just as kind of a little bit of reassurance, put 1 pump of grease in, and then make sure you reinstall those grease caps. A lot of people forget about those things, and then the next time you go to grease it, all you're doing is just pushing dirt and everything else that was stuck onto the end of the grease fitting right back up into the ball joint, causing premature failure. So best bet, keep those grease caps on there. It's a nice feature, and you might as well use them. All right, all that's left is to reassemble. Get the rotor on. Tighten the nut to factory specs. Install a new cotter pin, and then the dust cap. Then we can put the caliper on. Secure and plug in the ABS sensor, and then the tie rod end. Torque the tie rod end to 67 foot-pounds. And install a new cotter pin. All right, besides putting the wheel on, that's it. So one last thing, always double check your work whenever you're doing anything with brakes and suspension. Check over every bolt you touched and make sure everything is good to go. Make sure the backing plate's not rubbing, and then put the wheel on. So you may need an alignment after a procedure like this. Usually on these trucks, there's not a lot that'll change with the alignment, but anytime you change suspension components around, you should always bring it in, get the alignment checked, make sure you're not wearing tires prematurely. But after you get it assembled, take it for a good road test, listen for any noises, make sure everything seems good to go, and then after some time, just recheck your work and retorque your wheels. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that like button. Maybe leave me a comment. It helps the algorithm, which keeps me up at the top of the search, and hopefully my videos get viewed a little bit more, and that helps me come create more videos for you guys. So hit that like button, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, thanks for watching In the Shop.